Black Beacon is a 3D action gacha game made by Minjo Studio, which apparently consists of ex-Kuro developers. As of now, it is released on mobile devices and Google Play for PC. There is no PC client, which I still consider to be a big mistake. I will elaborate on this bit much later. For some reason, I only found out about the game about a week or so before its release, and the setting and art drew me in almost immediately. Unfortunately, my interest is waning quickly due to reasons within the game and without. In this video, I'll go through everything I came across in Black Beacon, including the writing, characters, combat, gacha system, character building, as well as the negative aspects of the game. The world of Black Beacon revolves around anomalous entities called beacons, which vary in all forms except their color. These beacons can alter their environment in some way, bringing forth unnatural phenomena known as anomalies. A scholarly group known as the MAN formed to monitor these anomalies, much like the popular SCP Foundation, but without the morally fucked up parts. The main character, the Seer, takes up a leadership role in the MAN, residing in the ancient man-made Tower of Babel. The tower houses the Library of Babel, which is an infinite repository of knowledge that can also house an infinite number of spaces. Whenever the library opens, people from the physical world are granted passage to its dimension, where the same spaces from the past, the present, and the future can exist together. This means that people from the future can meet people from the past and vice versa. However, when the library closes, one must return to the same spot at which they entered, both in space and time, otherwise they're lost forever. The presence of infinite knowledge within the library has often helped the MAN learn more about the world and guide other civilizations along the way. It has also led to countless MAN to lose themselves in the library forever, seeking knowledge that is basically impossible to find. The first 3 chapters of the story focus on the MAN characters and the library itself, and does a time travel plot surprisingly well. Usually I dislike time travel because it's very confusing and leaves me with more questions than answers, but this one is an exception. The story has the Seer time travel many times, being caught in a time loop where you cannot prevent something from happening in the future because it has already happened, and the actions taken to prevent an event end up causing it. The cause is the effect, and the effect is the cause. The writers also make this known to prevent players from getting too confused, so I have to give credit here even though I managed to figure out the time loop right before the dialogue confirms it. And then, Erashan was revealed to be a traitor right before she blew up the library. I guess it was supposed to be a surprise, but the trailer that plays in the background of the official website, where players can download the game, as well as whenever a patch is being downloaded, kind of gave it away because it showed Zero and Erashan fighting in the tower, and the tower exploding. As a result, I'm not counting it as a spoiler. Although Erashan blew up the tower when the library was still open, Zero and the Seer managed to escape. The rest are still stuck in the library and they have not returned as of the making of this video. Since they are playable characters, I'm inclined to believe that they would return later in the story, as gacha game logic seems to dictate. This brings us to chapters 4 to 6, where the now homeless pair is introduced to a Chinese civilization known as Qian. This sequence expands on the villains known as Nemesis and introduces a bunch of new characters, including Ting, whom I correctly predicted to be the next playable character. It also ditches the time travel stuff for a more traditional linear story, which is quite refreshing. The plot and characters maintain their high quality and the story keeps a serious tone. Speaking of tone, I was expecting things to be serious overall, but with the main characters winning at the end, because of course the protagonists are going to win, it's a gacha game. So to put it mildly, I was very surprised when I found out that the villains won again, and this time it happened right after a very hopeful moment. It is also worth noting that the darkest parts of the story use only text, artwork, and music to convey emotion. There is very little dialogue in these scenes in relation to how long they are, as if to prevent the characters from interrupting the player's thoughts. The first half features King Darius's march across the library, which made me feel a little bit bad for an irredeemable tyrant. And the second half features Wush's depressing backstory, which can easily rival some of PGR's darker ones. character writing is also pretty good throughout, with dialogue and moments with each that range from lighthearted and relaxing to serious and tense. There is also some comic relief thrown in during downtime, usually in the form of Zero's immortal bird, Chirp. Sometimes important character moments are highlighted using full-screen artworks and different music tracks. Speaking of artwork, Black Beacon is full of excellent pieces that show up regularly in the story, and not only for impactful moments. I disabled the HUD a few times just to take screenshots, they're that good. As for the presentation, the story uses a visual novel style with 2D sprites that have a surprisingly large number of animations. Pretty much the entire main story is fully voiced, which makes it more engaging for those who don't want to read everything. The quality of the voice acting fluctuates based on the characters, with more important ones usually being better compared to NPCs, though there are exceptions. The best voiced characters in my opinion are Zero, Arashan, Nana, Enki, Ting, Sin, and Darius.
How long has it been?
Based on our subjective time flow, it has been 2 hours and 25 minutes.
That's surprisingly long. Didn't they say that its activation time has dropped to less than an hour over the past decade?
This time and the last time were unexpected.
So are we just going to stand here and do nothing?
Well, thanks for helping me fight Ninsar. But then again, you didn't really help me at all. Feels like it's not a good deal for me.
Cut the crap, you little brat! If it wasn't for me, you would have been stuffed into the coffin by that intelligent weapon you made. Just hand over the command to stop that copper sphere from blowing itself up.
Master Enki, keeping promises is a virtue.
I see. It seems my silly brother bragged to you about something he hasn't actually figured out.
The notion that these stars are fragments of Earth adrift in the firmament. So many uncharted territories awaiting conquest. Do you understand my feelings, Fahad? In comparison, Memphis, no, even the entirety of Obed pales in significance. I wonder how I can travel to those stars to conquer those lands no one has ever seen. One day we'll leave our footprints across the entire expanse of the sky.
The game also features a lot of Mandarin words because of course it does, and it seems that the voice actors were either not familiar enough with the language or were not told exactly how to pronounce these words, because all throughout chapters 4 to 6, almost all of them are pronounced so many different ways by different characters that players who do not speak the language at all may not get a good idea of how they're supposed to be pronounced.
Is Master Yuan Xuan here?
No, unfortunately. Master Yuan Xuan left.
We will need higher level clearance from the Well-Being Office, or Master Yuan Xuan himself.
This is hardly surprising considering that all the underground water in the Jiangjin region stems from the Grandeur River.
As for why the anomaly spread to Sanglin City, we don't have any clues yet.
What's worse, the influences on the residents of Kanlin City have intensified.
Outside Sanglin City, near the Grandeur River.
The story mode is also full of typos and grammatical errors, which is to be expected since English is not the developer's primary language, but there are also plenty of times where the text does not match the dialogue. All throughout the story, characters would say one thing and the text would show another. The lack of polish and proofreading here was a big mistake, and blame should be placed on the localization team. There is also another important thing that affects chapters 4 to 6 considerably more, and that is the player sometimes gets a lot more information than what the main character is given. This usually takes the form of backstories and history, which is fine for world building but creates a small disconnect between the player and the seer. Especially since the seer is a self-insert character who is learning about the world alongside the player. This leads to a couple of moments where the player is not presented with options that they may desire because the seer does not have the necessary information, which can cause confusion or frustration. In summary, the story of Black Beacon is excellent from start to finish, and by finish I mean chapter 6 because that's as far as the main story went as of the writing of this script. It grabs the player's attention from the beginning and carries it all the way through, which gives it a big advantage over its more popular competitors like PGR and Wuthering Waves, both of which have mediocre opening chapters that struggle to keep players invested. The quality of Black Beacon's story is further enhanced because the writers have balls, which is very refreshing and sets the game apart from more light-hearted gacha games. This stance is a huge upside for Black Beacon's setting and has contributed greatly to the quality of the overall writing. Despite some of its issues, Black Beacon's story is still excellent, and I'd recommend not skipping it for anyone who wishes to try out the game. When it comes to story levels in games like this, I've come to expect linear layouts with groups of enemies placed along the way to the endpoint, so I was very surprised and even impressed when I found out in the first story chapter that the levels are open-ended. The first 3 chapters feature the library level, which I consider to be the best because not only does it look like the Void from Dishonored, but it also has unique mechanics, rewards, lore items, and enemies in side paths that sometimes loop back to the main path through Dark Souls style shortcuts. This trend also carries on to chapters 4 to 6, although they feature more linear levels, which I found to be disappointing in comparison to the library, particularly because they tend to block off side paths every now and then for some reason. Likely due to performance issues or poor optimization, all the larger levels are split into multiple segments separated by loading screens. This is true for most of the main story levels, some of which would have been better off being separate levels instead. Such as this one where I decided to take a look at the scenery and found that a few objects from an earlier section of the level was still loaded. As the story progresses, the player is provided additional tools known as stage skills, such as the ability to freeze enemies and dynamic props in place while exploring the library, or the ability to dispel harmful mist and manipulate props while exploring Tingyu City. Some levels also have their own gimmicks, such as the library stages in chapter 3 that switch between 2 versions at regular intervals, just like a famous level in Titanfall 2. Although the game switches a bit too frequently, the player can temporarily anchor themselves to one timeline using their stage skill. These mechanics allow the designers to make different puzzles based on the tools given, which in turn keeps things fresh and distinguishes the levels from one another. Overall, the level design is very good overall, though the limitations keep it from being a smooth experience throughout. The combat system of Black Beacon is quite normal when compared to similar games. Characters work on basic attack chains, heavy attacks, 2 skills, 1 core passive, and 1 ultimate ability as of now. In terms of camera controls, players can choose from a top-down camera or a traditional third-person camera. I chose the latter as I was more familiar with it, and I was disappointed to find out that not only did I have to turn the camera using my mouse, but there is also no manual lock-on button and no way to manually change targets. The camera also does not do a good job of focusing on the target, requiring constant repositioning and/or mouse inputs. This is likely why the game recommends the top-down camera, though I'd prefer if both perspectives are equally intuitive. Perfect dodges slow down time for a second or two, and to prevent dodge spamming, Black Beacon does the same thing PGR and Wuthering Waves does, where if the player dodges twice in a short period of time, the game starts a 1.5 second cooldown before the player can dodge again. It's an elegant implementation as it allows for some room for error on the player's part while discouraging players from spamming the dodge button. It is worth noting that Black Beacon's basic attacks activate on button release, not button press. This feature makes it so that whenever the button is pressed, the game waits to check if the player releases it within a certain time frame. If so, the game performs a basic attack, and if not, the game performs a heavy attack. Due to this small feature, Black Beacon's characters can throw out a heavy attack without doing a basic attack first, which gives the player a bit more control over the character compared to PGR, which doesn't use this mechanic. In contrast, dodges activate on button press, allowing for instant activation. This avoids the long-standing Dark Souls issue of slightly delayed dodges, which has led to players taking hits that they reacted to just on time. So I'll give the developers some credit despite this apparently being common practice in the genre. Some attacks that are telegraphed with a yellow ring can be parried, but the only method to do so is through a heavy attack. Unfortunately, the player is given barely enough time in some cases, which makes the timing quite strict. It's an interesting mechanic that gives the player's heavy attacks more utility, although slowing down these attacks to allow for a larger window could be a significant improvement. As for skills, they typically rely on Vigor, which is the diamond icons below the player's health bar. The maximum amount of Vigor that can be held and how it is spent depends on the character, but basic attacks can replenish it for all characters as far as I know, because I don't have all of them. Some characters have skills that activate other skills when certain conditions are met, such as Zero's first skill granting access to her second skill, which buffs her own basic attacks along with a team-wide damage boost. Unfortunately, the developers relied on this concept a bit too much. Quite a number of characters in this game, including Asti, Nana, Erashan, and Sin, also use their first skill to build up their second skill followed by their passive ability. Other than this trend, I find the overall combat system fairly good. Black Beacon launched with 16 characters. In terms of visual design, most of them are distinct from one another in appearance. Each faction has its own distinct style, and I find the simplicity and opulence of the MAN style to be my favorite. In terms of originality though, some of them suffer quite a lot here. Out of all 17 characters, including Ting from story mode, 6 of them stand out and not in a good way. Black Beacon's characters range from mostly interesting and original to tell me you worked on PGR without telling me you worked on PGR. Some of these designs are just blatant rehashes. I've criticized Chixia and Taozi from Wuthering Waves in my 1.0 video for this same reason. In Black Beacon, however, this even affects their elements, their poses on the character selection screen, and their movesets. The worst example by far is Sin. Her design marks Black Beacon as the third game that features Vera as a playable character. Wuxia and Viola resemble PGR characters moveset-wise, and Asti and Erashan have designs that suggest that some of the developers are fans of Ruby and Hololive respectively. Fortunately, the other characters are mostly alright, with Zero, Ming, and Ninsar being more interesting in my opinion. As for my favorite design, it has to be Zero. She is my favorite character not only because she is emotionless and level-headed, but also because she has a very simple yet interesting design that caught my attention the instant I saw her. A very important piece of her design is her skirt, which was made white to contrast the rest of her black outfit and provide clarity from any distance. Couple this with grey hair, gold accents on her clothes, and a few gold items, and you have an interesting design that uses only 3 shades and 1 color. Zero and the MAN characters are not the only ones with well thought out designs, as evident from Azi, Li and Ming, but it's weird that these characters were greenlit by the same people that approved Sin and Hefei. This discrepancy and lack of originality for a third of the playable characters is one of the most noticeable flaws of the game and is very difficult for me to ignore. This is especially so with Sin because I like her portrayal in the story. I can only hope that future characters are fresh and not just more rehashes. I've already had enough with callbacks in Elden Ring and I don't want more here. The gacha system of Black Beacon is quite generous. The permanent 5-star character banner is 70 pulls guaranteed and comes with a selector that takes effect at 30 pulls. New players only need 30 pulls for their first 5-star character. Both permanent and featured 5-star weapon banners are 50 pulls guaranteed. The featured 5-star character banner is 70 pulls with a 70% rate. The game tracks and shows pulls, which is to be expected from gacha games at this point. Players can also check their stats and skills of characters and weapons before pulling for them, which is a nice feature that helps players decide if obtaining them is worth it. The featured character banner being 70% is noteworthy because this rate is just high enough so that the developers can say that it isn't a 50-50, and it's just low enough so that the player can't always obtain the character that they want. It's basically a 50-50 without being a 50-50, so I probably won't be pulling on these banners unless the character really interests me. Other than that, my impression of the gacha system is really good. Regarding character building, Black Beacon does not seem to be very grindy, at least from what I can tell. It uses the tried and tested cycle of turn daily energy into materials, use that to upgrade skills and level up. Like others of its genre, subsequent copies of a character can be obtained to provide extra bonuses. It's nothing that we haven't seen before, and that's okay. The relic system of this game is kind of why I said that character building doesn't seem to take too much time. Basically, ancient marks can be obtained by redeeming tokens earned in side modes like Tome of Fate. Different bonuses are tied to shapes, and each time an ancient mark is redeemed, it comes with a random stat. They can be upgraded by fusing multiple marks of the same shape together, granting the stats from each one. However, the same stat cannot be boosted using this method. This system also seems very player-friendly, as players are given the option to simply change any stat they want, which results in less time spent on farming. Ideally, one would fill up all available slots with upgraded ancient marks that include a suitable shape for the character with stats that boost the character's abilities. Overall, I really like this system, and the only downside I can identify is that fully building a character wouldn't take very long, which may result in players filling up their roster with fully built characters a bit too quickly. Other than that, I have no issues with this. Since the game is allegedly made by ex-Kuro developers, players would naturally expect a high degree of generosity from them and their game. At launch, a lot of rewards were available to everyone, including free pulls, a free 5-star weapon selector from the Battle Pass, and a few copies of Zero and her signature weapon that unlock with story completion, which would be just enough to unlock all her potentials. Overall, I'm very satisfied with the developer's level of generosity, and after the controversy that I've went over in this video, I think it's reasonable to expect that they will be just as generous in the future, if only to save their reputation and win back their players. Regarding user experience, Black Beacon is surprisingly intuitive. For example, players are given a special notification on the main menu through Unchirp, so as to remind them of daily tasks and materials that are available to collect. When building characters, players can also go straight from the character's screen to the specific levels needed to obtain the desired materials required to build them. These quality of life features are very player-friendly and save plenty of time, and this would only amplify over time since more menus and features would likely be added in the future. However, there are a few instances that should have been removed. The first is how the game deals with checkpoints. When the player finishes a level, particularly during the first 3 chapters, the game would abruptly cut to an in-game version of the chapter menu instead of the actual one. From there, the player is forced to either start the next chapter, which immediately returns the player to the level, showing that the level is still loaded, or return to the chapter menu, which is required to replay the level or select any other part on top of being separated from the in-game chapter menu by a loading screen. PGR handles this far more elegantly by first playing a character outro to inform the player that the task is complete and then bringing the player to the chapter menu. Considering the developers worked on both games, I don't know why this approach was chosen for the main story, especially since it was for other content. Remember when I said at the beginning that this game was only available on mobile devices and Google Play for PC? Well, that's because someone decided to not allow players to access the game on emulators other than Google Play on PC. and there are still no plans for a PC client as far as I'm aware, so we're stuck with mobile-centric optimization and technical issues such as the following. All throughout the game, whenever a Code Vein style loading screen appears, it's basically guaranteed to be at least 10 seconds, at least for Google Play for PC. I don't play this game on mobile, so I can't say if the loading is better than on PC, but if I had to guess, it would be worse. All throughout story levels, especially in the library, I noticed that props such as books have a very low draw distance that leads to a very noticeable pop-in issue. I don't know why they weren't just baked into the level like the rest of the geometry, but this is likely an issue related to optimization, or having to make the game less expensive in order to run well on mobile devices. Let's move on to more serious issues that affect the gameplay experience. I started playing the game on April 11th, a day after its release, and at that time a ton of players including myself could not log into their Google accounts on PC. As a result, I was forced to use a guest account, which meant that I couldn't save my progress. After much frustration, I managed to find a workaround and log into my Google account, but this probably didn't work for others. Thankfully, the developers fixed this relatively quickly. In gameplay, there was one time that I couldn't move during a resource stage, and another where I got soft-locked during a story quest. Towards the end of chapter 6, my FPS plummeted for the final combat stage, the boss stage, and the EX challenge stage. Since OBS and YouTube were working perfectly fine, I concluded that the game was at fault. Thankfully, simply quitting out of the game and relaunching it fixed the issue. Unfortunately, I didn't send bug reports for any of them because I have no idea what caused them, so I couldn't reproduce them to give the developers enough information. Apparently, I got very lucky with regards to bugs as there are a lot more encountered by other players. I'm sure the developers have been working hard to fix them since the game's release, so I'd suggest patience on our part. Sadly, with the sheer number of technical issues plaguing the game at the moment, it would be reasonable to infer that the game simply wasn't ready to be released at the time, and it's a shame that it wasn't delayed to allow for a smooth launch. Overall, if I had to summarize Black Beacon in one sentence, it would be, this game is very promising and has many great qualities including combat, writing, presentation, and level design, but is plagued with localization issues and bugs at the moment and should have been delayed. I originally wanted to include the recent controversy in this video, but I decided against it since I wanted to split the subject of the game and the guys in charge into two separate videos that are dedicated to each. If you wish to check it out, go ahead, but if not, I'm not going to do anything because I can't convince or force you to make any decision, including liking the video and subscribing for more content. Thanks for watching.